There are some characters in P5X that I would happily recommend to anyone. And then there are the characters that I look back at and think, why the hell did I spend all those resources building you? Now, I've played through multiple metas, invested into characters that look great on paper, learned the hard way that being good doesn't always mean being worth your resources. So today I'm going to go through the P5X characters, or at least the top 5 P5X characters I personally would never invest in again, and explain more importantly why. Because of course an explanation to why I don't want these characters anymore would be pretty darn great. This isn't necessarily a these characters are trash video, because some of these characters are perfectly usable. Heck, some of them you can get to use in some of the newest content if you just want to try hard enough. The problem is when resources are limited, usable is not always the good enough type option. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Now, before we get into the whole start of this, I want to make one thing clear. When I say I would never build these characters again, I'm not necessarily saying that you should instantly delete them from your account, that you should not try to invest into them yourself. I'm just saying about opportunity cost for me. If I had a brand new account starting today, I knew everything that I know, would I spend my limited materials, persona materials, weapons, any of that type awakening resources into investing into this character once again? If the answer is no to this, they're probably going to be on this list. And that's especially important in P5X for me because one, I love a lot of efficiency related things here. And the biggest mistake that I've made throughout the years is building every character that I pull. Now, that's also because I'm a little bit of a meta chaser. I'm a little kind of crazy on doing that. But it is one of the main issues I've had, especially with building a lot of the characters I pull. You don't necessarily need to build 20 characters absolutely perfect, all your roster absolutely perfect. And that was something that I was always trying to do. Heck, even when the characters weren't there anymore in the meta, I still was trying to double back and absolutely go crazy on the character. And you only need a few characters that actually work. And I've learned that the hard way. So now that I at least got the foundation there, let's get into it. So the first character I would never heavily build again is Bowie. Now, Bowie was one of the few characters that came out on just TW at first that was so insanely cool. Like, first of all, the resemblance of Hatsune Miku was one of the few reasons that I ended up getting her. Then back then where we cared a ton about Guild Boss, I was like heavy on doing that. And I was trying to go for like the new single target electric user. She was a cool follow-up mechanic. She had all these cool like RNG aspects that could hit insane numbers. And I remember going back then where I was like, I need to get this character. I have to go ahead and invest in this character. And she was one of the few that I honestly decided to like put my foot down and be like, I'm investing into this character. And I think she was like my highest at the time at A2 or maybe A3 on my account. And it was kind of interesting because it was a lot of fun at first. And then as the time went on, I'm not even saying long term for patches, I'm just saying throughout that patch and then a couple other patches ahead of it, as time went on, I started to notice, I'm like, wow, this character is RNG as hell. And I started to get into that mode of like, I don't know if I really liked what I did with this character. And the problem was, as the future patches came on, P5X itself never really doubled back to her. We had a couple guild boss things, but the P5X kind of moved on from that. And that's of course the aspect of gachas themselves. But for Bowie, it was very, very harsh because with her, either you had her higher dupe or either you just straight up was not getting anywhere anymore after a while, because she needed to make sure she not only had her allies around her that were insanely good, always dealing damage, or at least having them deal damage in order to actually take advantage of her whole aspect, but she also needed to make sure that it was the right element type of situation. It was the right moment where you're always consistently hitting your RNG factors. And that was something that was a very taxing and stressing moment with Bowie that I kind of just was like, I don't want to play with this character anymore after a while. And the investment that I put into her wasn't that great. I think it was about 3 patches, maybe 4 patches, that I kept trying to get this character as high as possible. using like all my stamina bottles, trying to keep her kind of in that area of good check, and it just was not going to be enough. Now, I then made mistake number 2 with this character when they came out with her Mindscape, and I ended up trying to get her Mindscape up. I think she's still level 90 to this day. I'll have probably a picture that just shows it because I ended up taking all her gear off. But I got her to level 90 and I was like, what am I doing? Oh, why am I doing this? Because I started looking more into videos, started to try and think about like, do I really want this character up? And even with those level 90 adjustments and level 100 adjustments, it just was not something that I should have invested in. So this character herself was just one of the few characters that it just wasn't good enough for me. And that's personally for myself. I know there's some buoy lovers out here, especially for the over buoy, so I'm not gonna diss those guys, but I did not like this character, and the time that I tried to invest into her just did not equate to the result that I wanted. So this was one of the few characters that now, if I know what I'm doing today and how she got outdated by some of the just stuff that's been going on, I was like, yeah, nah, forget that. I'm not gonna invest into this. So this was definitely one of the characters that I was like, I'm not gonna invest into this. So for me, question, was she worth the resources? Hell nah. But let's go ahead and move on to our next character. Now, the next character I want to talk about is going to be Phoebe. Now, Phoebe herself, she actually had a decent rise back up to the top a little bit not too long ago, and that was due to the mono teams, right? But Phoebe for me was more in the aspect of it took too much investment to really get her there. Now, this was before I decided to be like, okay, every now and again I want to A6 a character, right? And this was before any of that stuff. So she was like a standard character. Took me a little bit together. After her banner passed, of course, took me a little bit together. I think I got her to A3, and then later down the line I ended up getting her all the way to A6. And this character was more in the direction of it was too much investment for too little, and that was because I threw a lot of resources at her, made it look so she was really impressive with helping some of my teams. But when you actually started to compare her to some of the other characters, such as like Futaba at the time, where we started to get Ange, the character, even at her highest investment, was insanely lackluster. And that was just because it wasn't really her fault. It was more like that teams started to evolve out of that hardcore mono team era, right? So for a character who's meant for that mono team era type aspect, with P5X, how it evolved, it now made the investment that I did a little bit too little. You got no return out of it, and that was some of the issue. It started looking really bad, and this is where I think a lot of new players get trapped. They see pretty much a character who's helping out their party a ton on someone else's account, and they're like, okay, I need to build them. I need to get this up here. I need to do this amount of investment. And the problem is, when you invest into a character that much without doing further looking ahead, now granted, if you love the character, do what you want to do, but if you're just going for like meta and stuff like that, and when you see this and you take that as one of those things that I gotta invest in this character, you get trapped, right? Whether that comes down to the weapon, whether that comes down to the dupes of the character, the team buffs that they could provide that honestly aren't much team buffs, the gear, all of that stuff. If you go ahead and try to mimic that, that's where it takes too much investment and an insane amount of time to get where this character will naturally perform better. And for Phoebe, it was a bit of that, but it was also just how the teams just evolved themselves, where once you had put all that investment in, and I did end up going pretty darn crazy on her as well. I actually started duping out her weapon to an extent. And once you put all of that just information in, all those resources and things into this character, it then performed terribly because the whole team aspect kind of went away. Now, as I did say, the character did end up coming back recently, and I think she's now still lower on most tier lists themselves here. But even with the elemental damage bonus that she gets, the more unified teams that are coming out a little bit now, which they're kind of divvying back and forth on that, it still isn't enough. Her level 100 is actually pretty decent. It's in that medium range. So I could play the character every now and again, since she is somewhat built and she does help out a decent bit on that. But it's not a character that I can kind of sit back and say, I'm going to build this character again on a newer account. If anything, I would be trying to aim for just using Rico as a 4-star character who's at least helping me get through some of the starter content or majority of the starter content just from knockdowns, right? Or either I just go ahead and say, screw it, I'm gonna stick with a character like Puppet who's just gonna at least keep me sustained, right? And so I don't like the investment I did on this character, and hey, that's just for me. It was a little bit too much investment for too little return. But with that out the way, we're gonna go to our third character. Now we have Howler. Now Howler is one of the few characters that I love the design for obvious reasons, but also I just love the design and I love the character itself. But she was one of the few characters that I wouldn't necessarily say that she was restrictive, but she was kind of in that area where like you could use her mainly with her fire team. Her fire team was probably like the best one you wanted to perform with, but she could also be used in teams like the wind team. She could be used in teams such as like the ice team in them, depending on how things would go. Now, this really just respected to elemental bonuses. This respected to the resonance like characters such as Mont. There was a point where we had Mont at least trying to use with her as well. And she was one of the few characters that I was like, dang, this character's pretty cool. But the fall off from grace was absolutely insane. So this character went from being a pretty decent debuffer to absolutely going off the rails. You can look at any type of tier list nowadays, and she is probably at the bottom of them for the debuffs that she has. And it's because the character herself is not like, she's not the most powerful of characters anymore, but she offered a decent bit with follow-up characters where we were thinking we were starting to get more into the follow-up meta, where we were thinking that we wanted to get that obvious healing decrease and stuff like that. That's where we thought she was going to be accessible, where she was going to be a lot better. The debuffs where she was going to try to focus a little bit harder. But instead of doing that, it kind of just did not happen, right? The character herself, with the cons that she had and the debuffs that she offered, it genuinely wasn't enough, right? And that was kind of the problem. The damage bonus can only apply to certain teams that she's able to do, and they had to be specific. So I think that's where some of the restrictions kind of came into play for me, where this character herself was kind of just drawn back. It just got thrown into a sideline where she could not really perform the way she needed to perform. And later down the road, once we got what's it called, after Howler herself, once we ended up getting like Matoi, when we started to get Blitz, those two characters kind of just made it look like, all right, well, we don't need this, right? So, and that was one of the few things that was cool, because with Matoi, she offered a giant amount of defense down values. That was something that we didn't get from Howler herself. When we had looks at Blitz, she not only had the defense down values, but she also had like the down debuff values, which a lot of teams wanted to get downs for extra point values and stuff. And the amount of stuff that Howler could do wasn't really enough. It was kind of like a huge distinction between, okay, these characters are really good and they can kind of just be pinpointed into a team, right? While Howler herself was like, all right, essentially, if you want my best buffs, we kind of need you to be with these specific teams, which is like very much so a problem. And I ended up building the Geist out of her. I think she's one of my other A6 standard characters that I had A6 before heavily investing into like standard and stuff like that. And I was kind of sad by it, because she's a character that's pretty darn awesome. She's cool. She has a goofy aesthetic. And I personally wanted to build her to the best of my capability. But after building the character, I find myself just never using her. And it's honestly saddening. Like, we're over here using twins. We can use the twins on debuff. We can use a couple other characters that are just somehow expelling her at this point. Now, twins debuffs aren't that good either, but like at the same time, I'm using kind of those characters. I'm using the newest 4-star Henri, which is kind of crazy over that, if you guys can think about that, right? A 4-star for me is getting more mileage out of Howler, and it kind of made me sad because debuffers already don't get a good rap inside of P5X. And with how she was very restricted, with how her debuffs were kind of falling off on certain things, it just wasn't enough. Now, granted, the A6 standpoint for a lot of things, you could very well kind of argue and try to get some things around. But even at that A6 standpoint, it's kind of hard to even say that she's going to be a character that I would even want to recommend to anyone, because I just can't do it, and especially not in this way of TW and KR. The fall off of that character is so immense, it's honestly scary. But that's just how I feel about that part when it does come down to this character as well, where like I don't have limited resources, and if I could go back and say to myself to not invest into that, I definitely would. But this is more of the two restrictive aspects of at least one of my characters I am one. But other than that, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next character. So I noticed I yapped a lot about that character, so hopefully we're gonna tear it down a little bit on this one. And this is a character that looked absolutely better on paper. And this is probably the most dangerous section that I want to talk about here, because the character looked great. On paper, when you're reading his kit, looked fantastic. And he is literally potential man. So you guys probably know who I'm talking about, and that's gonna be AKECHI. AKECHI was the biggest letdown I've ever had in my life. And I mean, the biggest letdown. I was like, okay, I'm gonna ace this character. We're gonna have some fun with this character. He's gonna be great. And it was like the first thing of this, where we had a sub DPS that also could buff your team, and it was expected to be like the character, right? Well, that was the expected point, right? He can help you out, he can debuff enemies and everything. But the main part of his entire kit was to be a sub DPS. Well, unfortunately, the use of that sub DPS was absolutely garbage unless you invested into duplicates, and even then it was still kind of garbage. So it was a character that I had the highest hopes for, especially back then where we were looking for the P5R collaborations, and I was like, cool, we're gonna have a lot of fun. I saw a lot of people going crazy with him at first, and I think I did a couple videos about AKECHI where I was stoked. Then when I got my hands on the character, I remember doing a video and it had like this grayscale AKECHI picture and junk like that, and this character was beyond bad for me, bro. Like, the ultimate wasn't crazy, the amount of damage he was able to sap wasn't crazy to record it and use it on himself or use it for the team. It was just like, you got a character that has this potential that just could not ever be used, right? They're pretty much just a benched figure on your team, right? You're there, you know they're there, but like, are they really there in your team? Which is the issue. And I think why testing the character is so important, I think I jumped the gun when I did pull for him anyways. Like, I'm a pull for him because I'm a content creator at the end of the day, but I think I should have tested a little bit more before actually getting the character, because the theoretical like ceiling for AKECHI was made to seem like he would be really useful, but in actual content, in actual practice, he wasn't a useful character whatsoever. And if you just did not have him upgraded to the highest extent of his awarenesses, you weren't getting any use out of the character. So it was more of a issue that I feel like this character could have been a little bit better, and he definitely sounded a lot better on paper when I first got him. I thought this character was going to be godly, but unfortunately, if you just did not invest into that A6 to get more out of his reliance for his sub DPS side, there was no real reason to use him. Like, why would I use a sub DPS when I could just use a debuffer or a buffer? And that's what it came down to, where this character just like got thrown to the side for me, especially in that category. But besides that character, we have our last unit that I want to talk about. So let's get into that. Okay, in our last unit, I built this character way too quick. And I really did build this character way too quick. It made me so happy that he was finally in the game. And this was AKIHIKO. AKIHIKO is probably one of my favorite characters from P3. I think it goes like Aki and then Mitsuru immediately for me. And I was stoked. I was so happy. I'm like, they put my boy in the game. Hopefully they give him a cosmetic. He gonna have some cool looking weapons. And when he came out, I was stoked. We were inside of Tartarus every other day, and it was great. It was an awesome time, and it just felt like he was lacking potential, right? He was a character that, yes, he had himself the perfect kind of like kit right then and there. You didn't have to go no A3, you didn't have to go no A6 or anything like that. He was great at base, but the problem was he took so much time to really set up and got practically nothing out of it. Where you have to do content in this game that's generalistic, where you have to sometimes do content in this game that is for even the SOS side of things. You don't want a character that has so much prep time that it's not going to be beneficial. And for AKIHIKO, not only was some of his multipliers a little bit lower, but AKIHIKO himself was just not that type of character. He had a cool weapon. Like, his weapon was insane. I think it was one of the first weapons that we saw besides like berries that also had like crit damage, crit rate. We started getting to the crit damage, crit rate meta where you started seeing characters with both of those attributes, making it like, hey, this might be a must summon. And it was one of those deals that even though he had this, it was not very helpful. And it was just because he took way too long. He took way too long to set up. I hope like maybe in the future they do rework him a little bit more, but I don't think they're going to. It's just the character himself took way too long to set up, and he wasn't doing everything he needed to do in order to accomplish what you wanted, right? I built this character hecka fast, got him on up, started going crazy on the crit damage, and it wasn't that he was necessarily a bad unit. It's just like by building him so quickly, it was not, it made me dump all of my resources into him and get nothing in return, pretty much. So this is why I want to tell people to, like, when you're building a character, especially if you're trying to fast build, take a step back, look at your current teams, look at the upcoming characters if you actually have a little bit of that, because I don't know if Global's going to end up catching up in the future. But if they do end up catching up in the future, then don't pay attention to that last part. But take a little look back, see what role you're actually missing, see, do you really want to build this character? Heck, maybe let some other people test them out, and just save if you have to save. Use what you got to do if you have to do it. AKIHIKO was one of those few that it made me very sad to see how they did my boy, and it was just because the long time it took to actually cook for him was just not there. It took way too much time, and compared to a lot of other DPSs, unfortunately he was just at the end of the barrel, because you weren't going to use him inside of generalistic content. It takes too long to set up. Long form content, there's probably a better AoE damage dealer. So and he also got the bad end of the stick, because his damage then got power crept, because at the time period, the next update, the devs said, hey, let's go ahead and just demolish the amount of damage we can deal with our AoE DPSs, and he just got left in the dust. So yeah, that character, as much as I do love him, it kind of hurt me with that one. So that's another character that I just would not build on a newer account ever because of that issue, especially knowing what I know today. But other than that, those are the 5 characters that I will never ever build again, as much as I love those characters themselves. And I'm not going to nitpick anyone else who built them, because at the end of the day, you want to have fun, build what you want to have fun with. But it was just one of those things that when I built those characters, I utterly was dissatisfied with them, especially down different patch ways. But now we talked about this, I want to know from you guys, what is a character that you regret building? Whether you're on TW, KR, CN, Global, what character do you regret building? Because I'm almost positive there are going to be some controversial answers inside the comments. And if you want to avoid making the mistakes, obviously you could check out some further content. I'm going to be updating some of my guides as well, so look out for that. But man, there's a lot of stuff that happens. But till next time, everybody, I'll see you guys next time, and peace out.